Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Well, it's time for another market update to see what has changed week over week in the freight market. Have things started to get better? Are they more or less the same, or are they getting worse again? As always, we're going to take a look at the general overview, including volumes, rejections, capacity, diesel prices, and then we're going to specifically focus on the spot market for dry vans, reefers, and flatbeds. And at the end of this video, it's going to be data versus experience. Ready? Let's go. As always, all the charts are going to be attached right here. So let's start with the general overview of what is happening in this market week over week. And as you can see, everything is red. So general volume, how many loads are there in general, not just on the spot market, that decreased week over week by 1.71%. So volumes are going down. General rejections also decreased by 4.57%, and as of Tuesday are at 5.85%. Unfortunately, they went down even further from Tuesday and are, as of today, at 5.58%. So it's way more than 4.57% down. Now, on the spot market, the load volumes on the spot market went down by 4.11%. And spot rates, if we take a look at all equipment types and average it out, spot rates decreased by 2 cents per mile. All right, let's take a look at diesel prices. What is happening there? So this is the price at the pump. I get this data from AAA. As you can see, Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Mississippi, these are places where the price at the pump on average is cheaper, whereas California is the most expensive. But in general, the Northeast, West Coast are the more expensive places to get diesel. Now, you also might notice the plus and minus signs on certain states. These are the top 4 that increased or decreased in the average price per gallon. So as you can see, like Oregon, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Florida, they all experienced an increase in diesel prices, whereas California, Utah, Nebraska, and Vermont experienced decreases. Now, if we take a look at this map, this is diesel less IFTA. So what is the raw diesel price? And if we take a look at it from this point of view, Illinois is the cheapest, but in general, the pattern stays the same. The South is not as expensive, whereas the West Coast and Northeast are. All right, speaking of diesel prices, no good news this week. I'm sure you all know about it already, but as of this week, the average diesel price per gallon on a national level is $3.57 per gallon, which is 6 cents higher than this time last week. It is almost 2 cents higher month over month, but still 20 cents lower year over year. All right, what about capacity? I do apologize for the 2 lines that I have here, the 2 white lines. Ignore the top one. The bottom one is supposed to be as close to 0 as humanly possible to show you what is the net change in carrier population. And this is measuring the number of MCs. So week over week, we actually lost 115 carriers net. And this comes after we gained last week. So yeah, it's all evening out at the end. But yeah, this week it is a loss. So now let's go ahead and take a look at what's happening on the spot market, and we're going to start with dry vans. Now, this is data that I get from FTR Intel. I just put it into this more or less easy to read table. So week over week, and this is for the week ending on June 13th, so last week. Week over week, dry vans saw a drop of 2 cents per mile on the spot market. The rates are 1.4% lower than this time last year. Volumes also dropped by almost 1% for dry vans, and they're 6% lower than this time last year. All right, let's take a look at some maps. This is a map that I make using truck stop data, and this shows you where the bigger concentration of loads is for dry vans. And as you can see, it's Texas, California, and some of the Southeast. In general, if we take a look at the cluster, it's the Midwest and the Southeast that has more loads. Now, we also look at the load to truck ratios using truck stop data. Anything a shade of red is overcapacity. There are more trucks than there are loads. It's just the darker the shade of red, the worse the overcapacity. Anything yellow is more or less equilibrium, about 1 to 2 loads per truck. And then anything light green, I would say, Arkansas and South Carolina, this is 2 to 3 loads per truck. Now, I decided to also get a full-on DAT load board subscription just for their heat map because I wanted to compare. I think it's very important to look at what the two main load boards are showing, since these are the two that are most used. Now, they have a heat map, but it measures the MCI, Market Conditions Index. And the way it's measured is a little different from the load to truck ratios. It's more based on searches, right? How many times does a broker search for trucks versus how many times does a carrier search for loads? And this is for the dry van. Anything that is red is actually a tight market. This is where you have a better chance of negotiating. And then the lighter it gets, orange, yellow, blue. Blue is where there is significant overcapacity. It's going to be very hard to negotiate. So for dry vans, according to this MCI index, you can see it's the South and Southern California that are more or less okay. Now, there's also Ohio and Pennsylvania that are not bad, but they're surrounded by blue areas, which means that those deadheading trucks are going to dilute the whole situation. All right, now let's take a look at what's happening with reefers on the spot market, and it's not as bad as for dry vans. Week over week, they saw a 5 cent per mile increase. This is about 0.3% higher than this time last year, the rates I mean. Volumes also increased by 0.5%, but the volumes are about 12% lower on the spot market than this time last year for reefers. So again, let's compare the truck stop data to DAT. So first, let's take a look at where the concentration of loads are for reefers. California, Texas, Georgia, Illinois. That's pretty much where most of the loads are, most of them in California, really. But in terms of a cluster of states, yeah, it's also the South and the Midwest when it comes to volume. Now, what about load to truck ratios? Again, anything red or a shade of red is overcapacity. Anything yellow is equilibrium. And then we have states like Idaho, Arkansas, South Carolina that have 2 to 3 loads per truck. We have South Dakota, which has 5.22 loads per truck, and North Dakota, which has 6.3 loads per truck. That doesn't mean that North Dakota and South Dakota are great areas, because if you looked at the other map, the load map, there is not a lot of volume there. So let's take a look at the MCI index on DAT. And you will see that in North Dakota, yeah, it's blue because brokers are probably not searching for trucks there. There's nothing they can sell. But for reefers, Southern California, the Fort Worth, Dallas area, Georgia, Jacksonville, North Carolina, basically pretty much the Southeast as well as Southern California is where brokers are looking for trucks more than trucks are looking for loads, if we're comparing. Yeah, the Midwest is not great. Missouri has some potential, but places like Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, yikes, it is a mess. All right, let's take a look at flatbeds now. So flatbeds are kind of in between what reefers experienced and what dry vans experienced. They saw a decrease of 3 cents per mile week over week, but the rates are about 1% higher than this time last year. Now, volumes week over week went down by 6.3%, but are 12% higher than this time last year. So basically, week over week data is crap, but year over year data is okay for flatbeds. That's the pattern. All right, let's take a look at the concentration of loads. Nothing changes. It's always Texas has the most loads, and generally the South and Southeast. California is always the outlier with flatbeds, but that's mostly Southern California. Now, in terms of load to truck ratios, very interesting, the pattern that formed this week. It's like someone took the map, cut it in half, and anything that is north of the map is over capacity. It's actually very interesting to see. Yellow, again, is equilibrium, 1 to 2 loads per truck. Nevada, Arkansas, and Alabama is 5 to 6 loads per truck. It's interesting that Nevada is there, but that's skewed a little bit. There are not a lot of loads in Nevada. And then we have Louisiana with about 6 loads per truck. And Mississippi, as always, is the best area, 12 loads per truck. And this is simply because not a lot of loads end up delivering to Mississippi or near Mississippi, which means that the capacity is always lacking in that state. But yeah, not much changes for flatbeds. Let's take a look at the MCI index via the DAT heat map. It shows you pretty much the same thing. Brokers search for trucks more in the South and the Fort Worth, Dallas area, as well as in Jacksonville, Florida, which was pretty interesting. They also search for trucks in Arizona more than trucks search for loads. This is a little bit misleading. Arizona is not a good place in the sense that it's not going to take you to a better market, right? You can get a decent paying load from there going to a place like Boise, which has about 5 loads, right? Or to Colorado or to Wyoming, Montana. But if you want to go from Arizona to a place like Texas or Arkansas or Mississippi, yeah, either there's not going to be that load or it's going to pay like $1 per mile. All right, so data versus experience this week. Gonna be honest with you guys, this week has been one of the most challenging weeks in a while for us, regardless of the area. So yes, there are better areas for flatbeds. It's the South, especially the Southeast, which by the way, did get worse week over week. So basically you're always trying to get to a better area, right? You're struggling to get to that better area. And when you get there, you realize that any load that's worth anything is going back to a dead area. So you end up grabbing that load and you're struggling again to get back to a better area. Another thing I noticed is that those reliable markets that we have relied on, at least like Arkansas, for example, they are not as reliable anymore. I actually was surprised this week. There were not a lot of good loads out of Arkansas, which was predominantly the market that we strived to get to simply because we knew we could get a good rate and we could stay within a good area. That is not the case. On average, my booking time this week was about 7 hours. So yeah, perhaps it's a better idea right now, considering in what shape the market is in. I think maybe it's a better idea to just book the highest possible paying load, regardless of what area it goes to, as long as you know you can deadhead out. Perhaps this is the strategy to take because clearly it is very difficult to stay within good areas at the moment. What about you guys? How do you book your loads? Do you focus more on the rate or do you focus more on the destination? Do you focus on both? And how has your week been? Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining and watching today. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep learning. See you in the next video.